Welcome to chess, ladies and gentlemen. How's everybody doing out there? All right, to my people in the Philippines, Kamusta, Aking Maga Kaibagan, Mabuhay. So for those of you that don't speak Tagalog, I just said hello. How's everybody doing? My friends, long life, long live. Appreciate you guys stopping by, taking a look at this game here. I got a good one for you. And I'm actually going back in time a little bit. This one is taken from the 2019 Altibox Norway chess tournament. And I've only been doing YouTube for a couple of months. So, I mean, I wasn't covering stuff back then. I've just been covering pretty much stuff in a couple of months. So I'm just kind of, taking a trip back real quick. And as always, at the end of the video, for those of you that like those chess puzzles, I got what you need. And as always, I appreciate the subscriptions, guys. Keep them rolling in. I'm almost at 700. So I just need a few more hundred. And then I'm doing A-OK. But yeah, if you guys are ready, let's go ahead and see, take a look at this game, see what we got. Bam. Okay, so we have knight to f3, knight to f6, we got c4, we have d6, knight to c3, we have g6, get this up here, bam. And we have e4, bishop to g7, and we have d4. And so we have the King's Indian, the normal King's Indian variation. Now, this is very similar to a lot of you guys that might play the Pirts, with the exception of this C-pawn. A lot of times when you play the Pirts, it's this particular setup, but it just has the, the general pawn center. And so it kind of turns into a King's Indian type of situation when you have the, the C-pawn pushed and stuff. So we have castles for black, bishop to e2. We have e5 trying to attack in the center. We have bishop to e3. Knight to g4. We're trying to see if we can't, cause some type of destruction with a take on e3 and then a take back with the f-pawn. Kind of damage white structure a little bit, but we're not going to allow that. Wesley so says we're not doing it. So we see bishop to g5, attacking the queen. We got f6, bishop to h4, so knight to c6, and we want the knight to back up. So we got d5, knight to e7, knight back to d2, or knight down to e2, and we have h5. H5 is not a bad move. It's one of the top moves. There's only about 3 moves played in this position. But the much stronger continuation would be F5. Now, this is what you guys need to understand about the move F5. At the end of the day, when you get into like the strategy of chess and when you get into like actual pawn structures and how you attack, you start to learn that you want to attack in the direction that your pawns are actually facing. So for black, it would be with their pawn structure pointed like this. So if we just back up, back up before we have that move. When you see what black's pawn structure, it's heading in this direction. And so F5 is going to be the perfect attacking move because you're trying to undermine this center that, white has established. And then the same thing for white. Their pawns are pointing in this direction. So they're going to want to probably push something like B4 and try to hit C5 and try to see if they can undermine this structure. So it's pretty kind of like advanced, like, attacks and stuff like that as far as pawn structures and stuff like that are concerned. But, we would have something like F5, and after castles for white, we would see H6, trying to see if we can't, hook this bishop up. And so we would have H3 and then knight back to F6. And as you guys can see, it's not really too big of a problem that black is kind of exposed a little bit because they do have a lot of protection around their king, especially this dark square bishop. So going back, we had H5, and then so we have castles. We have knight to H6. We have F3. So knight to F5. We have bishop to F2, and bishop to F2 is actually the novelty of the game. But it's a pretty strong move. It puts white in a really good position because, like I said, you need to try to get an attack rolling on this side, and bishop to F2 supports a C5 pawn push very well. So after we see, black is, Caruana is recognizing that. So he tries to kind of clamp down on the situation so that you don't have the ability to push B4 and C5. So we go ahead and take, pawn takes C6 en passant. Pawn takes B6, and we have B4. And so you can see that, you're still trying to push B4. We're still trying to get our attack going on this side. And so we see bishop to E6, knight to b3, and we see the move f5. And so, you know, black has finally gotten their f5 push in like they were looking at earlier. Now, backing up here, it might seem like you could possibly push d5, because as you can see with what black did is they actually kind of gave themselves a weak backward pawn. It's really, really hard to push it. And it might seem like you can push it in this position. But if we did see something like that, it would actually fail, because you'd see pawn takes d5, pawn takes d5, and you would actually see knight to c5. And the problem that you have here is the fact that this bishop is undefended. And if you were to do something like this, you would be taking the bishop with tempo, because you'd be hitting the rook and the bishop and the queen. So we would have to see the bishop come back, and then after pawn takes d5, you see that we're up a pawn here, so that wouldn't be something you want to do. So we see f5, we see a4, just expanding as much on the queen side as possible. So we see bishop to h6, queen to d3, queen to d7, and we see rook f to d1. And so we see rook f to d8, so we see b5, queen back to e8. So pawn takes c6, we have knight takes c6, and we have knight clamping, hopping into d5. And as you can see, the knight is threatening all kinds of, nastiness over here. So we can't really let it live. So the bishop needs to go ahead and take that off. So the bishop takes on d5. We see pawn takes d5, and then we see knight to b4. Trying to give a little attack on the queen, but it's a little artificial, because the queen does have the ability to step to c8. And then you see rook a to b8. Which kind of saves the rook, or saves the knight, but unfortunately you have the move bishop to b5, and now the queen is hit, and you've disconnected the protection from the rook onto the knight. So you really have to kind of give up the rook in this situation. So you've been able to win the exchange as white here. And so rook takes b5, we have pawn takes b5, and we have queen takes b5, and then we have rook just snaps off that pawn on a7. Now an alternate move. A very strong continuation would have actually been rook to a5. And what it does is it gives black the ability to mess up and trap their knight. So you're going to need to see queen to b7, because, I'll show you the variation in a second. But, we give a tempo on the queen, rook would take a7, the queen would have to come back down to b5, and then we'd probably see something like h3. Now, if we did go back after rook to a5, and we did see the queen just backing all the way up to b8, this would actually trap the knight, because now you see the knight doesn't have anywhere to go. And the queen at b7 was holding on to this a6 square, so it was allowing a take back if the knight does move. So, it was giving the knight a protection. So going back to what we had, like I said, we did have rook takes a7 directly. Pawn takes e4, pawn takes e4. We got rook to b8. We have knight to a5. Queen comes to e2. We have rook to e1. Queen to d3, and we don't want to trade as white, so we go ahead and just back up the queen to c7. We're threatening all kinds of checkmates situations here, so the rook comes back to f8 to guard that. So we see knight to c4, knight to c2. Not worrying about the rook here, because we have knight takes d6, and then we have bishop to e3. Now, I want you to remember this position right here, because I'm actually going to be coming back to this exact position right here. But there is a really huge roller coaster that occurs in this particular situation, because Wesley So and Fabiano Caruana actually make game-losing blunders each. And to take you into that scenario, bishop takes e3 is a actual game-losing blunder by Wesley So. Now, not giving everything away, I haven't told you who wins and who loses, but bishop to e3 actually allows a lot of mating threats and ultimately the loss of an entire piece. But continuing on, I'm gonna come back to that point, but I'm just gonna show you what was played in the game. So we did have knight takes e1, which is correct. The knight takes f5, and then queen takes e3 with check, and it forces the king over to h1. And then we see queen takes a7. And this is actually the game-losing blunder by Caruana. So they both, within a couple of moves, made game-losing blunders. Like, not just like, it kind of worsened the position a little bit. Like, literally, each player made the type of blunder where, like, you're just continuing to play, like, nicely would just end the game. So, after queen takes a7, we do, of course, see queen takes a7. But going back to this position here, before we get going further, I'm going to come back to bishop to e3. I want you guys to pause the video real quick and see if you can find pretty much the game-winning move for Wesley So. And we'll catch up with you in a second. Okay, cool. This was like a very like hard move, or if not impossible to find, and it wasn't something I was thinking about when I was looking at the game. But the move is actually rook to e8, rook to a8. Now, it might look strange because you're thinking, wait a minute, I'm just throwing the rook away, right? Because it's like, man, the rook can take, right? Rook takes a8. Well, if the rook does take, it's actually just horribly losing. So we have rook, queen takes f7 with check. King goes to h8, only move. We see queen takes g6, and we see bishop takes f2 with check. King actually sidesteps to h1 because we do have a checkmate here on knight to f7. Regardless of what the rook does, if the rook tries to come over here and protect, we're going to be checkmating anyway. So you have the tempo, to waste to step the king over. We would see rook to a7 trying to, defend against that checkmate. But we would actually see rook to b1, and that's threatening automatically a checkmate on b8. So we have to cover that with the knight. And of course, we're not going to take because, we have back rank issues. So we redirect the rook to c1. After knight back to c2, we've successfully moved our rook from here over because it was being attacked by the bishop. And then after we check on f7, the rook has to take that because the king is checkmated. So we see queen takes f7, and then bishop to e3, and then we move rook back to b1 again. We throw the knight in the way because, like I said, we do have bank rank issues coming down here. So we're not going to take that. So we would see queen to f8 with check, king come to h7, and then we would see the queen take on b4. And this is just 1000% won by white because all of their points are defended. They're up 2 entire pawns, and they do have this completely passed pawn, and there's just no way to win this. So going back to what we had in the game, like I said, after we had king to h1, the follow-up move that Caruana did not see. And I think when we get to this point, a little bit, in a couple of moves, I'll be able to show you, I think, what Caruana was actually thinking and what he actually missed is why he took the rook in the corner. He actually had this move right here, queen to g5. Now, the problem with queen to g5 for white is the fact that this is checkmate in 1. And the other problem is the fact they cannot take this queen because you have a back rank checkmate here. So this was something that Caruana missed. Basically, at the end of the day, if we back up, as long as you maintain the queen on this diagonal, you have the ability to capture this knight here when it tries to make a discovery on the king with check. And so, like I said, if we had queen to g5, we would probably see g3, g3, and then queen would come back to e3, and we're just threatening mates here. So you're just continuously threatening mate as black. And then after knight to h6 with check, the queen would be able to come back and cover the checkmates on both of these 2 squares. And I think that's what Caruana missed. And then that's why he went into the trade, just thinking he had 2 pieces against the queen. But unfortunately, as we'll see, that's not quite sufficient enough. So after queen does take a7, we see rook takes f7, and then we see queen down to g1, just making sure that we defend the this back rank mate issue. What also was possible pretty strong was queen to a6 because it's going to be attacking this pawn with a check, and it's also going to be defending that square there. So if we go back to what we had queen to g1, we had knight to c2, we had h3 giving the king some luft, knight to d4, we had queen to a1, we had h4 trying to stop these pawns here from moving. We have king to h2, king to h7, we had d6. And so we see rook to d7. And it is actually in this position that Caruana does resign. And basically, he resigned because of the move queen to a5. The problem with queen to a5 is the fact that you're going to be winning this pawn either immediately or within a couple of moves. And so what I mean with that is if you try to defend probably the best way you can with knight to c6, you're going to see queen come to c5. And it's protecting this pawn and it's attacking the knight. And then once the knight has to move away, you're going to be winning the pawn on e5. And the problem is you actually have some checks set up here. And after this takes and takes, you're going to be too far outside the square to actually, win that type of a thing. So what I'm going to do at this point is in the top right-hand corner, I will put up for you the pawn to freeze video that I made and the square of the pawn video. So that way you can understand when I'm talking about these pawns being frozen and when I'm talking about, you being able to check here and being inside the square with this king and stuff, you'll understand what I'm talking about if you're not familiar with those concepts. So backing up here, Yes, another one as well could have been maybe moving rook to b7, but like I said, everything pretty much loses. You're either going to be losing a pawn immediately or with like a slight fight, but it's gonna be dropping. So queen would take e5. We'd see knight to b5, and after queen to d5, you're gonna have to sacrifice a knight for this pawn, and then after so queen takes d6, and then the rook comes over to g7, and as you can see, you know, you have 2 pawns and a rook against a queen and 3 pawns. It's just not fair. You can even sacrifice this queen for this rook if you want to be funny, and it would be all she wrote. So that is that game, and that's from the 2019 Altibox Norway chess tournament, and that is round 9. And so getting to these chess puzzles, the one I gave you guys before, and I did say it was a Boden's mate. So if you're familiar with the Boden's mate, it's basically like the bishops, you know, cutting across and checkmating the king, and usually in a queenside castle situation. And so we would see the move d5. Now what d5 does is it's going to allow, if you do take back, which is what's probably you have to kind of do, the queen is going to sacrifice itself on c3. After the pawn takes, you're going to be mating with bishop to a3. And as you can see, the bishops are cutting off this king completely. And going to the next puzzle here, this is a discovered attack as well. Yeah, if you want to set this up on your board and take a look at it and see, or put it in a chess engine or something, don't run the engine, just put it in the board so you can see what I'm talking about. You know, you see if you can't come up with the answer. It's a pretty cool one. I actually got the answer right in this one, so I was pretty proud of myself. But I appreciate you guys coming by. Salamat Kabagan, and Mabuhay, and I think it's Pa Alam. Yes, Pa Alam to you. And I appreciate you guys coming by. Hit me with a subscribe and a like, and leave me some comments. And I will see you guys next time. I appreciate it.